Hello and welcome to another Take 5 with Automation World. I'm David Miller, Senior Technical Writer for Automation World. Today, I'm going to be talking about a white paper that was recently put out by the Industrial Internet Consortium on the different ways that companies can get involved with standards development. Now, what really stood out to me about this white paper, and what was interesting about it to me, is that rather than just walking the reader through the specific standards and the minutiae of their provisions, this paper actually presented a vision of how standards affect the business landscape and how companies can turn their involvement with the creation of these standards into an actual market strategy for their company. So first, it's useful to understand why we're seeing the proliferation of so many new standards right now. The main reason is that there's a very common pattern we see in the life cycle of technologies, and many of the technologies that are being used in industry right now are reaching a particular stage in that cycle. So, in essence, when technologies are first being developed, standards are often eschewed because these products are proprietary, maybe even experimental, and as such, any restriction at all on their development is seen to essentially stymie innovation. Once commercialization picks up pace, however, vendors are focused on locking customers into their unique offerings. So unfortunately, what that too means is that any kind of standard offering interoperability could be a detriment to their business model. So they're still not really going to be interested in picking up standards. However, when the technology becomes more mature and begins to reach a commodity status where everyone has it, customers increasingly desire integration so that they can migrate from one product or system to another, or potentially engage in best-of-breed sourcing and procurement. So suppliers, meanwhile, at that same time, usually want to broaden their customer base rather than selling to the same end users over and over again, which has stopped ensuring their growth and has actually become a drag on their growth. So the vendor lock-in model at that point outlives its original purpose, and that's where we are now. So as you can imagine, that's why this white paper is making suggestions as to how suppliers can get involved in the standards making process. So what this white paper most effectively walks readers through is the pros and cons of being involved in standard making efforts. On the one hand, earlier involvement in standards development will allow companies to position themselves as thought leaders. It will allow them to prepare for the implementation of future standards earlier in their product development life cycles because they have advanced knowledge of what it's going to look like. And most importantly, it will allow them to put their finger on the scale and influence the standard that's being devised so that it works with their product and their product works with it. On the other hand, there are some risks. For instance, if your company has a particularly proprietary or innovative technology, involvement in a standards committee could involve some leakage of valuable intellectual property. You might lose a competitive edge. Not only that, but involvement may be a drain on time and resources. One consideration to make for smaller companies in particular is whether or not the influence they have on a standards committee will yield enough benefit to justify the cost of being involved. And all of these points and more, the white paper does give some useful tips on how to evaluate your company's place in the market and to decide what the appropriate degree of engagement with a standards making body is. So as an example, the paper discusses procedures for cataloging the various different building blocks of a given product's technology stack and then making the relationship of each component to various standards being developed clear. So the goal of this is to allow companies to identify the lower level commodity components in their products, the ones they're comfortable participating in standards development for, and then separating them from the higher level, more proprietary or value-added technologies that they want to guard intellectual property for. And in addition to that, advice is given on designing corporate governance policies and authoring particular types of participation agreements with standards-making bodies to protect intellectual property to the greatest extent possible, even if they do get engaged with standards-making activities for some of their more proprietary components. So the paper is a very interesting read. It has all of that and much, much more, frankly. It's a 30-page white paper, and I think it could be useful to many companies that are looking to enter into this space. And as well as the strategic advice offered, There are several very useful appendixes that detail past, present, and future standards relating to various types of technology, as well as a list of standard development organizations, industry consortia, and other associations. So again, if this is something your company is interested in learning more about, it's a very complex topic, I can't recommend this white paper highly enough. So that's all I have for you today.